In late September 1726, a doctor and man midwife called John Howard was approached by a member of the Toft family. History remembers this meeting as being the start of one of the greatest hoaxes in history. However, I think that this is not so much a story of a hoax as it is a story of desperation and the vilest of family and medical abuse. I'm Heidi from the Obsession podcast, where we get horribly obsessed with the weird and unusual. And today we're going to talk about Mary Toft, the woman who gave birth to rabbits. And as always, I will be illustrating the story while I talk. Anyway, back to the meeting. Some reports say it was Anne Toft who approached Howard that day. However, the third confession of Mary Toft states that it's her husband Joshua, so let's just say it was him. Joshua tells the doctor that his wife, Mary, has just suffered a miscarriage and hands Howard a pot that appears to contain a malformed fetus. Howard was astonished at what he saw and stated that on no uncertain terms that any woman could have produced such a thing from her body. The fetus somewhat resembled a small, headless cat, yet also had a spine that could have come from an eel. As dismissive as he appeared, this hybrid monster pricked Howard's curiosity, and he did make a visit to the Toft residence the next day. The Tofts lived in the very poor market town of Godalming, which is 30 miles southwest of London, and the doctor was ushered into their small and humble home by Joshua's mother, Anne Toft. Now, remember the name Anne Toft, because she is a nasty, nasty, nasty piece of work, as is her creepy daughter Margaret. Howard is told that Mary, who appears to be in her bed experiencing great pain, had had a miscarriage the previous month, and then had another the night before, producing the bizarre creature that had been handed to him the previous day. Mary goes into labor shortly after Howard arrives, and Anne, who is a midwife herself, assists in the birth. What Howard witnessed looked exactly like a vaginal birth, and he could clearly see the object being pushed out of her body. But on closer inspection, Howard saw that it was not one, but a collection of objects, specifically animal parts. He described what he saw as being 3 legs of a cat of a tabby colour and 1 leg of a rabbit. The guts were as a cat's, and in them were 3 pieces of the backbone of an eel. He was understandably intrigued, but wondered out loud about the absence of a head. At this point, I think I should talk a bit about the woman in the bed and her family. Mary Toft was born Mary Denya in 1701 to poor farmers. She was married at 17 to 18-year-old Joshua Toft, a wool textile worker, and his official job title was clothier. The Toft family had once been the head of a very successful cloth manufacturing business, but within a generation their company had failed and their standing in the community had plummeted. Joshua was on the bottom rung of the textile industry, and it appears that he wasn't particularly skilled, as he brought home barely enough money to keep his family alive. Mary had to supplement the family income by laboring in a hop field 2 hours walk from her home. By the age of 25, Mary had given birth to 2 children and lost one to smallpox. Life was excruciatingly hard, and neither Mary nor Joshua had the skills or the education to break out of the endless and unforgiving cycle of drudgery and disappointments. So, back to the story. So John Howard, and I know to Australian viewers, this is strange because we had a former PM called John Howard, but I don't believe he's any relation. So John Howard, the man midwife, returned the next day, and Anne Toft handed him more parts that she claimed Mary had expelled from her body during the night. Howard made many more visits over the next month and witnessed Mary birthing the limbs of cats and a single rabbit's head. On one memorable day, she pushed 9 dead baby rabbits from her body. Her extremely creepy mother-in-law, Anne, and equally awful sister-in-law, Margaret, were always hanging around and helping. At some point, Howard moved Mary to Guildford, both because it was closer to his home and he could observe her more often, and also because of the constant nosiness from the townspeople was getting too much to bear. Convinced that there was at least a chance that Mary could be a medical marvel, Howard sent letters to the most prestigious doctors and scientists in England, inviting them to witness Mary and her marvelous monsters. One of the people he wrote to was the secretary of King George I. Instead of dismissing Howard as a prankster or a crackpot, King George was interested enough to order royal surgeon Nathaniel St Andre and secretary to the Prince of Wales, Samuel Molyneux, to investigate. Mary's chamber in Guildford was now being graced by noblemen who, along with Howard, watched the expulsion of dead rabbit number 15. Luckily for St Andre and Molyneux, Howard had pickled all the rabbits in jars and handed them over for examination. Now, St Andre was a very interesting person, and he did some very impressive mental gymnastics to convince himself that he had witnessed a miracle and not a hoax. Now, if St Andre had been alive today, he would no doubt have been a plastic surgeon to the Kardashians, and he would definitely have had a TikTok account. St Andre's post as royal doctor only really came about because he was Swiss and he could speak German, and King George only spoke German. And that's it. That's basically why he got the job. He was the perfect person to be caught up in this situation because he thrived on drama and notoriety and getting attention. Even though the bunnies were obviously of different ages, some being a few months old and others just fetuses, and even though there were remnants of hay and grass in the stomach of an older rabbit, St Andre insisted that there was still the possibility of a medical marvel. Mary told the gentleman of her own theories. Now, she had been heavily pregnant while working in the hop field, she explained, when a rabbit ran past her, triggering an intense craving for some rabbit meat. She and some of the other women workers had chased the rabbit, but to no avail. The bunny was just too fast for them. Mary was tormented by her pregnancy cravings and could think of nothing but eating a nice rabbit stew. Sadly, she could not afford to buy even one rabbit, and so her cravings went unsatisfied. Now, Saint Andre was thrilled to hear this story, and he took it as evidence of a theory known as maternal impression. What is maternal impression? So it was, as I said, a medical theory that had been going around for some time that stated that the development of a fetus could be affected by the emotional stimulus experienced by the mother. So say a baby was born with webbed fingers. This could be attributed by the mother having been startled by a frog or a toad while she was pregnant. You might remember that cleft palates used to be called hare lips. That was because they were thought to be caused by the proximity of hares and rabbits to a pregnant woman. Women were warned about spending too much time with the family pets while expecting in case the dog or the cat imprinted some of its traits onto the fetus. It does seem crazy to us now that people could entertain these ideas, but this was a world that knew nothing of genetics and needed explanations for congenital conditions. So, this story that Mary told was exactly what St. Andre and Howard wanted to hear. For them, it could be evidence that maternal impression was indeed real. Their excitement wasn't shared by everyone, however. King George needed more proof and sent another German surgeon by the name of Syracuse Ahlers to Mary's birthing chamber. Ahlers performed a very painful and invasive examination of poor Mary and also of the rabbits that were birthed in his presence. There were dung pellets in the rectums of some of the rabbits that contained corn, hay, and straw, and most of the rabbits looked as though they'd had their muscles cut from their bones with a cleaver. Ahlers smelt a hoax, and his suspicions fell not just on Mary, but on John Howard. Yet another man was brought in to examine Mary. This time it was Sir Richard Mannington, eminent doctor to London's upper crust. You can imagine the humiliation that Mary was experiencing at this time, not to mention the intense physical pain. Mannington was immediately skeptical and declared that the object that Mary birthed earlier in the day to be nothing but a piece of hog's bladder. He accused Mary of being a hoaxer, and this is the first and only time we have record of her crying during this ordeal. Howard and St. Andre were now in damage control. Their reputations were in danger, and even St. Andre was considering that there might be such a thing as bad publicity after all. By this time, Mary Toft and her gynecological feats were a media sensation. She and the doctors who championed her were being parodied in newspaper cartoons and on stage. For the weeks that she became famous, Mary became part of the popular culture at the time, and absolutely nothing was in her control. Mary was brought to London, where she could be kept under constant surveillance. She endured examination after examination from an unending stream of curious male doctors. Mary had previously described the pain of birthing animals as like the tearing of brown paper, and at no point in the records is there any concern for her health or for her physical and mental anguish. Things would get worse for Mary. She became very ill, not surprisingly, most likely from infections, and she briefly lost consciousness after a seizure. Then a porter was caught sneaking a small, dead rabbit into her room. He claimed that Mary's sister-in-law, Margaret, had paid him to find the smallest rabbit possible and to bring it into Mary. Mary insisted that this rabbit was just for her dinner. And on the same day, it was also revealed that Joshua, her husband, had been seen buying huge amounts of young rabbits at the market. Mary stubbornly refused to admit to the hoax until Mannington gave her a terrible ultimatum: tell the truth or submit to surgery so that he could see her inner workings for himself. Now, surgery in the 18th century was a horrifying prospect. Remember, there was no anesthesia, and this threat was enough to make Mary's reserve crumble. Her first confession was on December the 7th and was taken down by one of her detractors, James Douglas. The transcript of the first confession starts with the heartbreaking words, "I will not go on any longer, thus I shall sooner hang myself." She tells the strange story of an unnamed woman who was the wife of a knife grinder. In this story, the knife grinder's wife tells her a plan that will ensure that she will never want for money as long as she lives. Her words from the confession are, "She fetched a rabbit which was little bigger than a seedling rabbit of 14 nights old. She stripped it wholly and tried to put it up whole, which I told her I was not able to bear it. It was like to kill me, and I would not do it." This bizarre story continues with the woman cutting up and mutilating the dead rabbit until it can fit easily into Mary's vagina. The men at the proceedings did not believe this tale, and Mary was forced to make another confession the next day. In Mary's second confession, she reveals, "There was no such thing as a woman advising me to any such thing, nor never brought me any rabbits." It was not until her third confession on December the 12th that Mary revealed the true mastermind behind the scheme, unsurprisingly, her mother-in-law, Anne Toft. From the transcript of the confession, she, Anne Toft, told me to strip a young chit or cat. She persuaded me to throw the head or skin away and told me that the guts and liver I should save and call for the pot and let it fall into the pot, and sent a woman, Mary Gill, that she might hear it fall in the pot. So it's a little hard to understand, but basically Anne devised a way for a neighbour called Mary Gill to be present when Mary expelled offal from herself. Mary then says that Anne explained her full plan, and she told me that if I would do it and go through, I should get a good living and be ruled by her and not tell of her. She goes into detail about how her mother-in-law would cut up pieces of animals and reform them into a hybrid monster and then force them inside of her daughter-in-law. Then, we get to the first visit from John Howard and his problem with there being no head amongst the animal pieces. When I was alone, she, meaning Ann Toft, would ask me, what shall we do for that? So she ordered me to get a rabbit, which my husband got for me, boiled and ate. She ordered me to keep the bones of the head and one foot because one of the cats was lost. I threw away some of the bones, the rest I gave to her. 2 days later, after she put up the underjaw that was like to tear me to pieces, it was so jagged, then forced her to take it out again. Mary then describes the horrific pain she endured. I was all night in a most violent rack and torture. I said I was ready to be tore to pieces, the bone ready to come through me. Mary endured this day after day. When Howard appeared, Mary was then forced to expel dead animal parts and skeletons from her body, and the sharp nails of the rabbits and the jagged edges of the bones caused excruciating pain. When she left for Guildford, Anne gave her 2 pre-cut rabbits to keep in her pockets and instructed her to insert them herself when she was left alone. The men did believe this version of the confession, and Mary was charged with being a notorious and vile cheat. She was sentenced to several months in Bridewell prison, where the spectacle continued. During her stay in prison, Mary was exhibited to members of the paying public who jeered and laughed at the rabbit woman of Godalming. After around 4 months of imprisonment and regular public shamings, Mary was released. Also publicly humiliated were the doctors involved, but I don't really care about them or the fact that their careers were ruined. The newspapers and satirists were relentless. The most famous take on the scandal was by artist William Hogarth, whose print depicts Mary surrounded by her doctors, her bedroom floor covered with leaping bunnies. Mary did not make any money from the hoax. She went home and returned to her ordinary, dismal life. The Godalming Parish Register shows that in 1728 she gave birth to a daughter called Elizabeth, and the birth is recorded as her first child after her pretended rabbit breeding. So even the official parish records were throwing shade. She did make a brief return to public notoriety in 1740 when she went to prison for receiving stolen goods. Then she fades into obscurity until her death in 1763 at the age of 62. It's undeniable that the life of Mary Toft was a sad and a desperate one, and she was a victim of abuse rather than a master hoaxer. And it also goes to show that it's historical practice for certain doctors to not really listen to women. So I'll finish this drawing, post it up at the end of the video. Please like, subscribe to the channel, and keep well. I'll see you next time.